Let's get you up to speed with what forced 3 editors to write to the president. They came together to address President Cyril Ramaphosa on the treatment of journalists. They say reporters in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng were told by looting mobs they'd have their faces, quote-unquote, cut open for reporting on the breakdown of the law and order, I should say, in the country. Now, the residents of the 2 provinces, many of them young children, are being forced to act as security guards to try and protect businesses and homes. Let's speak now to the editor at News 24. That's Editor-in-Chief Adriaan Basson, who speaks to us from Cape Town. Adriaan, thank you very much for your time. It goes without saying that the threats and the actual assaults on some of the journalists, particularly in Kandla during that famous gathering, and then in recent days, reporters have come under attack. But what forced you to finally take this step of addressing the president directly about threats to journalists' lives?
Yes, good morning, Paulie. I think, as editors and news editors yourself as well, we are very close to the action of stories like this. And, our first and foremost duty is to report the story and to make sure we accurately report the facts on the ground. What has happened over the past week has been unprecedented in our country's democratic history. It's been unprecedented certainly in my career as a journalist of almost 20 years. The level of violence, the level of lawlessness, and the complete lack of control has reached such a point yesterday that myself, Mondli Makanya, the editor of City Press, and Stephanie Seville, the editor of The Witness in Pietermaritzburg, we are sister publications in Media 24, came together and we asked ourselves, is there something more we can do? And we decided on this format of an open letter to President Ramaphosa. I think the final, thing that made this so unprecedented for me was the sense of the absolute lack of authority over the violence and the looting that we've seen over the past few days, which has obviously also threatened, like you correctly say, the lives and the safety of our journalists who report on these instances.
Adriaan, the KZN province, before I ask whether or not the president has responded to your letter, the province of KwaZulu-Natal, it's synonymous with threats, political violence. That is just something that is out there. If you want to read about it, you're welcome to go and Google and you'll find this information. But what makes that province almost the hotbed of this violence and now threats to journalists' lives? Ordinarily, you would think that people understand the role of journalists, that we report without fear or favor, we report and do not take sides. If anything, we want to hear both sides.
And I think in this story there's so many sides that we should hear, and I think that's what makes it so incredibly complicated, Paulie, to report. So I think, the current chapter starts with the incarceration of Jacob Zuma. We cannot get away from that. And I know there's been lots of criticism to the media of calling it the Zuma unrest. But certainly a week ago when Zuma was incarcerated, it's now exactly 7 days ago. I mean, this is where it started. There can be no factual dispute to that is the moment where things started to happen. What were those things? Well, the first we saw, you will remember last Thursday, was trucks around, I think, Tonga Toll Plaza, blocking the road, and then further along the N2 and the N3 as well, trucks blocking the road and preventing people from moving. That was the first indication that something else was happening.
Yeah. This
has now spiraled out of control. We at News 24 have reported, I'm sure as you have, on the very clear signs that there were orchestrated actions in the background. And I mean, that goes back to what you've just said about the history of violence in KZN. I think it would be naive of us to think that those structures that existed before 1994 would have just disappeared. We're talking this morning about Umkhonto we soldiers who are involved in organizing this. They would have been involved in that as well. So I think the biggest concern myself and my colleagues had this week was that absolute sense of dread that the government has lost control over violence and over the supremacy of using violence.
Yeah.
I mean, the moment that that happens and that other players in society has that supremacy to commit crime, then it's anarchy. And I think that is what prompted us to speak out so loudly and strongly, because ultimately Ramaphosa is the commander-in-chief, as he likes to remind us. But what has he done? What is he doing at the moment? It's now been I think 2 days since he's addressed us. He's getting his ministers to speak to us. And if he's thinking that sending 2 ministers to work from a KZN office is enough, then we are in big trouble, Koli.
Yeah, and it's going to make our work that much more difficult, Adriaan. I mean, not once in my life as a reporter on the field have I ever had in tow with me security personnel, but I understand that that is what some newsrooms have had to do in the recent past. Some people, Adriaan, are going to say, well, there they go again, trying to make themselves the talking points or the story. I can say with certainty, and I have spoken to this journalist specifically, Samgele Masego, he was assaulted during that infamous gathering outside the Nkandla homestead. Smungalwa, the editor, politics editor here, had to actually get in and try and rescue him, which he did. Talk to us about, from your end, about specific names of journalists who have actually been assaulted during this period.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. That happened at Nkandla. There's always been this tension between Zuma supporters and the media because, as you know, one of Zuma's conspiracy theories, completely false, of course, is that the media has been partly responsible for his state of affairs. But I think something of grave concern that we've started seeing spilling over into this violence in KZN specifically as well, Koli, has been the racialization. So I've got a colleague called Kavil Singh who works in Durban. This week when he went out to one of the big burning shops and wanted to speak to some of the looters about what they were doing and why they were doing it, he was told in no uncertain terms that because he's Indian, he's not welcome there, and that this person would cut open his face. He had to flee the scene. We had to whiz him out of there and get him to a place of safety. Now, this is a issue of grave concern because we know that some of the agents provocateurs of this violence has been stirring racial tension in that province. And, you know, the fact that journalists are not being spared this treatment is a cause of grave concern.
Yeah.
We've also had in Johannesburg on the weekend, Jeff Weeks, our senior investigative reporter I think in Jeppystown, that's right, when he reported on the looting there, he was told, and when people saw he was a journalist, he was told by some of the looters that he will die today.
Yeah.
So that antagonism is palpable, it's real. I know security guards have been sent out by some newsrooms. We kit our reporters in that circumstances with bulletproof vests. These are some of the things we try to do. Look, as a journalist, you know there's some risk coupled with your job. But what we have seen has been certainly unprecedented this week.
Adriaan Basson, thank you very much for engaging, my brother. It's a tough job, ours. It's a thankless one, in fact, many a times. Thank you very much for that. I didn't get to get my question to you because of time. The response from the president, the role of social media in these threats. There's just so many things that we as journalists are coming under in recent times.